And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution.
Tonight we have a gentleman back on our show that was here on December 8th of last year. He was involved with the Malheur trial in Portland, and John Lamb, our guest tonight, has been following this thing, and he's literally been at every court hearing and every day of trial and hearings that they've had in not only Portland but also in Nevada. And John has been following now the Bundy trials, and he's been following all the stuff that's been going on, and he's got a really interesting update on what has happened over the last 9 months since we were on the air with him. And quite frankly, it's absolutely amazing because things are happening in our court system that I wouldn't have believed would have been even possible because of what I thought was the fairness in our court system. And we're living in another country, a different country than the one that we thought we grew up in. And so with that, I'd like to reintroduce John, and also I'd like John maybe to give us a little bit of an update on the things that he's been doing since he was on with us on December 8th talking about the Malheur trial.
Thank you, Dan, for having me on here tonight. I appreciate being back. And, we've got, it's been a long last few months. I think it was December the last time I was on. And since then, I've been through 2 complete jury trials in Las Vegas, Nevada for some of the Bundy people that were, some of the 19 guys that were arrested there. And one of those trials, the first one, was resulted in a mistrial totally, and the 4 defendants that were the mistrial, they were retried again in a second trial just a couple of months ago, and I was also at that trial. And so Eric Parker, Scott Drexler, Ricky Loveland, and Stephen Stewart were 4 guys that were in that trial, and they were found not guilty on 34 of the 40 charges. And 2 of the guys were totally acquitted, and they don't have to go back to trial. But the government has decided to retry 2 of those guys, Eric Parker and Scott Drexler, a 3rd time. So this will be the 3rd jury trial that these 2 gentlemen will be going to in 1 year's time. So just think about it. It's been a couple of months it took per trial, and they spent almost 4 months of their life this year so far in jury trial. They're going to go to for a 3rd jury trial coming up on October the 10th. And this trial is supposed to last until January of sometime, so 4 months of jury trial. I'm going to be back there in Las Vegas, Nevada, covering this trial, observing it, reporting to people like Dan and others, trying to make sure this message gets out and the world knows what's happening here, because these kind of things shouldn't be happening in this country. These men shouldn't have been charged in the first place. These men sat in prison for almost 18 months while they were going through these 2 trials, and now they're going to go through a 3rd trial for the exact same charges again. And one thing we've learned, myself, in watching these jurors each time, the government hasn't had a case from day one. And the jurors have spoken over and over again here, letting the federal government know there wasn't a case. And that's why they have acquitted so many of these guys. And we've had hung jurors because the decisions were so hard to make. The charges on these things were conspiracy against the federal government, conspiracy to impede, things like that. And when there was no conspiracy here, and they haven't been able to prove it yet up until now. So this next trial we're going to start on October the 10th in Las Vegas. It's going to have 7 defendants. 2 of the defendants are going to be Eric Parker and Scott Drexler that have been already tried 2 times before on these same charges. Then we're going to have Pete Santilli from Ohio. He's the media guy that was outspoken through the Refuge and the Bundy ranch standoff there in 2014. We have Ryan Payne from Anaconda, Montana. And we have 3 of the Bundys, Ammon Bundy, Ryan Bundy, and Cliven Bundy. Those are the 7 guys that are in this next trial.
Okay, John, one of the things that I wanted to have you mention is the fact that the 2 guys that are being retried for the 3rd time, they were found innocent on 34 charges, both of them, and then the jury was hung on the other 6 charges. So it isn't that they had a guilty charge on 6 of the charges and that they're retrying. They had a hung jury on 6 charges, but 34 were completely found not guilty. So this is like triple jeopardy. Is that the way it appears?
It definitely is. It's definitely triple jeopardy. They even with them, the jurors did not find them guilty on nothing. It was all not guilty. They just could not agree anonymously. And one thing that was interesting is 11 jurors said not guilty. There was only 1 juror that hung up these additional 6 charges that they're going to be retried on. And the conspiracy was not guilty for these guys. So the only thing that they were having a dispute about is the gun charges. They really didn't understand it, the jurors didn't, the way it was worded. And that was the questions they had for the judge and the prosecutor is explain it what this means. And so the judge wouldn't explain it, the prosecutor didn't either. So they came back with with being hung because they did not understand why they were being charged the way they were being charged.
Okay, well that is something that I would never have believed that we could see in this country, but it's obvious they're going to keep retrying these guys because they want to find them guilty of something so that they can continue to try to use them as a whipping boy and show that it doesn't pay to stand up against the federal government. And that's really what it boils down to. The federal government can be dead wrong on a lot of these charges, and they don't care because they're using our tax dollars, which are virtually unlimited because they spend way more than we give them anyway and then borrow the rest. But the bottom line is that they're using our money to beat up on our own citizens, and that is not right. John, can you kind of tell us some of the things that have been going on in these hearings and these trials, some of the testimony, and maybe give us a little color on the prosecutors, the defending attorneys, some of the things that are going on, let's say adds color to the conversation and gives our listeners an idea of what's really been happening in Nevada.
Yes, some of the most interesting things that's happened in these last 2 trials were the first trial there back in February for these guys. The government wouldn't allow witnesses. We had dozens and dozens of witnesses that were in the hallway waiting to testify that were that were already pre-approved to testify, and at the last minute, the prosecutors filed motions to keep these witnesses from testifying. And even in that first trial, the FBI handcuffed one of our witnesses for the defense and threatened that witness with arrest if he testified. And so we ended up having almost no testimonies in the first trial, and Eric Parker was the only one that really testified, which still ended up in a mistrial after it was all over with. In the second trial, we've seen similarities to the same thing, where they would not allow us to have any testimonies from any witnesses because the government claimed that you do not have a right to defend yourself against the federal government. And if you don't have a right to defend yourself, say out in the field against the federal government, it follows you into court, where you're not allowed to have any defense in court with witnesses testifying on your behalf. You can't have any witnesses testifying how good you are and your character type witnesses. You can't have any of that. So in the second trial, Eric Parker got on the stand to testify on his own behalf because that's his constitutional right. And after about 15 minutes, the judge shut him down and stricken his whole testimony to the jurors and said you can't use any part of it, and made him get off the stand and wouldn't let him finish testifying even on his own behalf, and left Scott Drexler to testify on his own behalf. And that was the only witness that was allowed in that whole 7-week-long trial, was one defendant that actually got to testify. No other witnesses, no witnesses that were at the Bundy ranch during that standoff. None of them could testify. It was just plumb bizarre how they just shut us down. In this third trial, they say they're even going to shut us down even more, that we do not have a right as the defense team to any self-defense even in court. And they don't even want the lawyers to do opening arguments, that they're saying that these opening arguments may taint the jurors for jury nullification, may taint these jurors for sympathy of some sort. And so the only way they can give opening arguments or closing arguments in this next case is they have to write it all down, present it to the prosecutors to get it approved first. And if the prosecutors do not approve these opening and closing arguments, they're not going to be allowed to give them.
Wow, John, that sounds just exactly like what happened in Nazi Germany, in the Soviet Union, in all of these totalitarian regimes in the past that literally made justice a sham. And that's exactly what you're telling me is happening in our own justice system against good citizens that really shouldn't even be there in the first place. You and I had a little bit of a conversation before we went on the air. Would you address Jeff Sessions and the fact that Jeff Sessions actually made a part-day appearance there? I think we were all hopeful that President Trump and Jeff Sessions would intercede in this, and we would see pardons for all these people because they've already been through hell, and it's time to end this travesty.
Yes, in this last trial we just had there in Las Vegas, Jeff Sessions, we heard that he was coming, and so in the very first few weeks of the trial there, Jeff Sessions showed up. He actually observed the trial for part of one day, and then he gave a public statement afterwards, and it's on record. People can find this at different places from the news and everything out of Las Vegas. But he made a statement saying that he was going to stay neutral in this case, but he turned around right at the same sentence and praised the prosecution for the good job they were doing under such stressful situation, and he thanked them for what they were doing in this case. And he totally denied to have, refused to have any talk with us, litigation with us, talking about any of this at all, and just mainly gave praise to the prosecution there.
Well, that is just totally the opposite of what I thought we were going to get out of the Trump administration on the public lands issues, on a lot of these issues. And it disappoints me because I'm seeing them kind of turn around on some of these things. I know on the Paris Climate Accord, he said he was going to pull the United States out of it, but then in the next breath they were talking about how they might be brought back into it if it was under the right circumstances. Well, there aren't any right circumstances when it comes to the UN taking over our country. And I think we all recognize that's exactly what all this climate crap is about. So, but anyway, I want to get back to the defendants in the trial. Would you like to kind of talk about some of the different charges that are being leveled against the Bundys, and then also talk about maybe some of the secondary trial stuff that's going on for some of the folks that were at the Malheur Wildlife Refuge, and kind of give us an update on all that. So.
Yes. So the refuge there for the Oregon deal, all the guys have finished their court there. All the trials. We did have one more court trial since the last time I was on, and it ended up being a final 4 defendants. And out of all those charges, the government or the jurors found those guys not guilty except on one charge each. And those 4 guys were convicted by jurors there in Oregon on these one charge each there. And they haven't been sentenced yet. That sentencing is coming up in October. But there are guys, out of them 4 guys, 2 of them are expected to get up to 10 years, and 2 of them are expected to get up to 6 years in prison from the refuge deal. Other than that, all the others were acquitted except the ones that pled guilty before the trials. In the trial there in Las Vegas, coming up, we have so many things. We only got a couple of more weeks, for this before we go to jury trial here, and so we're all struggling. Everybody is getting motions filed and their last-minute stuff. And Cliven Bundy's attorney threw a wrench in the wheel here, as you could say, by filing a motion to not be Cliven Bundy's attorney, Britt Whipple. And that hearing was actually today. And Mr. Whipple went to the judge and tried to get removed, but the judge would not let him, and he's been paid close to $100,000 already, and he hasn't even went to trial. Cliven's been in jail for 19 months without a trial, without any bond, and Mr. Whipple pretty much is just filing motions for the last 19 months, and that's what he's got paid is $100,000, and now he wants to quit just before trial. But the judge has ordered him to stay on the case, go through this whole jury trial for Cliven, and so that's where we are there. There's a bunch of others that have been filing motions and these last-minute motions. One interesting thing is the government offered Pete Santilli another deal. They offered him, if he would plead guilty to conspiracy against the federal government, they would let him out of jail right now. Pete Santilli's been in jail for 19 months himself without bond. He's the media guy from Ohio, and they have railroaded him all the way, the same way they have all these others, and declared that he's too dangerous to be let go. But then they give him a deal, a last-minute deal here before trial, trying to get him to accept conspiracy charges, and they said they'll just let him walk out of jail if he'll accept these conspiracy charges. So I don't see where the danger is of keeping these guys locked up, and how the government or the prosecutors are getting by with this, and the judge is allowing it. And he obviously is not very dangerous if they can just offer him conspiracy and he can walk. The charges, I can read a few of those to you and kind of show you how these charges themselves, to me, seem like double jeopardy. One is count 1, conspiracy against the federal government. Then count 2, conspiracy to impede the federal government. I'll skip count 5 is assault on a federal officer. And then you've got count 8, threatening a federal officer, which is like an assault type thing. Count 6, use and carry of a firearm. And count 9, use and carry of a firearm. Then you've got brandishing 2 times. You've got count 12, obstruction of justice. Count 14, interference with commerce and extortion. And you got count 15 again, use and carry of a firearm. And you got brandishing again for the third time. Then you got count 16, interstate aid to extortion. These are some of the charges for showing up at a protest. And these are just a few that I'm reading off to you. But if you notice, there's 3 brandishing charges, 3 use and carry of firearms charges, 2 conspiracy charges, 2 assault on federal officer type charges, and you've got about 3 obstruction of justice charges. You've got 2 interference with commerce and extortion and interstate aid of travel. It's just double jeopardy and triple jeopardy in all these charges. Instead of charging you with 1 thing or 2 things, they've got all of these charges, and it's all over cows. And the grazing rights and land rights is what this is all over. And this is why the jurors cannot find these guys guilty. I believe that with all my heart, sitting in these trials, talking with some of these jurors. I have met numerous of these jurors afterwards. They'll come to us and they'll talk to us and wonder who we were and why we were sitting in court for 3 months while a trial was going on. They see the same face every day, and we see the same face sitting up there as a juror, and they've come to us and talked to us. And it's been quite interesting, and they've said the same thing, that these charges, they don't fit the crime. They don't fit that's why they've been finding these guys not guilty or being hung.
Well, John, one of the things that I'm quite certain of is that there weren't any firearms used by the Bundys or the folks at Malheur against federal agents. As a matter of fact, it was the other way around. The weapons that were brandished were being brandished by the BLM, and they were dressed up in tactical gear. They looked like they'd come straight back from Afghanistan or Iraq. And my understanding is that there was no assault on any federal officers either. Was there anything like that?
There was no assault at all, absolutely none. Like in Oregon at the refuge, the officers were almost 40 miles away. They never came out to the refuge, so there was no assault there at all. In the Bundy Ranch, the officers were all on the other side of the gate, yards and yards away. The officers are the ones that had tactical gear, weapons pointed at all the protesters. One interesting thing we found throughout these court trials, listening and setting in, is that in Oregon there were 15 informants. These informants brought guns. These informants slept at the refuge. They were there. They were even training or trying to train, offering training to the other protesters, trying to get them to get involved and get them to be aggressive. And so this came out in court. 15 informants out of 27 people arrested. In the Bundy Ranch incident, what's so interesting there was 19 guys arrested there, and there was over 60 informants. The government has spent hundreds of thousands into millions of dollars on this case. $960,000 were paid to contract cowboys to round up cows. That's the kind of business I want to get into, to make money if as a cowboy. No cowboy makes $960,000 to round up 350 head of cows. That's unheard of. But the government paid $960,000 to contract cowboys to round up 350 head of cows. Thousands of taxpayers' dollars have been wasted here into the millions in this trial for things that these guys are not even guilty of at all. And the limits and things that they went to by hiring 60 informants at the Bundy Ranch, that's a lot.
Yeah, you're right. That is a lot. And the thing that stands out above all other things on this whole fiasco is the fact that the federal government is doing an awful lot of things that I would consider illegal, and yet they're filing charges against citizens who are there basically to protest what's happening in this country, and they're acting basically exactly like I would expect the court system in a country like, the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, or Nazi Germany, or some other totalitarian system, because this is not the sort of thing that we ever grew up expecting out of our court system.
No, if you think about our Constitution, and that's one of the biggest, things of our country, what's founded on, this court has not allowed it. They have been denied a speedy trial. They have been denied bond. They have been denied their First Amendment rights. Their Second Amendment rights, they're told that they are not allowed to have at all. You can't do a First Amendment and a Second Amendment together. So if you're going to go out and have a First Amendment rally, you can't take your Second Amendment with you. I'm not even allowed in the first trial there to carry a Constitution into the courtroom without having it confiscated. That's not America. This is wrong in these courts. I'm threatened every time I would try to take a Constitution in there. The Constitution is not allowed to be mentioned in the courtroom at all. The defense cannot mention the Constitution. They can't mention the First Amendment rights. These things are forbidden for the jurors to hear. Jury nullification has been one of the government's biggest fears. That word is not allowed to be mentioned at all in court, along with the Constitution and your First Amendment rights. So this doesn't sound like an American court. It doesn't look like an American court. And I have been to court trials all over this country and have never, ever seen this type of abuse and corruption going on in a courtroom ever.
Well, that's amazing. Well, this is a great opportunity to break for a few minutes. Kelby, I'll turn the show over to you for a short break, and then we'll come back on and we'll finish this discussion. Okay, we're back. Anyway, John, would you like to maybe talk about how some of the personalities of the prosecuting attorneys, of the defense attorneys, and some of the things that are involved there, so that we can get a better feel for how, this whole thing is kind of unwinding?
Well, it was really interesting in this second trial when the government heard all these not guilty verdicts, and I was sitting there in the courtroom. I kept hearing when the jurors handed over the verdict and the judge started reading them off, it was just not guilty, count one, not guilty, count two. And we read these off, 34 not guilties. I mean, I was literally crying in the courtroom myself with emotion. I've been so involved the last almost 2 years in this case that hearing these not guilties were something else. Then I watched how the government, literally the prosecutors, they literally lost it. I had never seen a prosecutor get so emotionally upset and angry. He got up after all these verdicts were read, and he was just so angry. He was yelling in the courtroom, and he said, "Your Honor, these men are dangerous. It's not when they're going to do something again or kill a federal officer. It's not if, it's when. They will do it. They will strike again. These men are cowards." He called them every name in the book, and he spent a good half hour, 45 minutes doing this over and over again. He'd point at each defendant with his finger across the room, and he said, "Eric Parker is a coward. He's a slithering coward. He hides behind concrete barriers, and he's going to kill a federal officer, and he doesn't deserve to be free." And when it was all said and done, the judge, that was the first time in all these months, she granted the defense one motion, and she granted that Eric Parker and Scott Drexler could be freed from prison after spending 19 months in there without bond because they had been found not guilty on so many charges. She was forced to let them go home. They are going to retry them, but she was forced to let them go home this last month and a half until this next trial is to start on October the 10th.
Wow, that is pretty amazing. So the judge gave the prosecutor at the end, after the not guilty verdicts had been read, that kind of time to do his little diatribe and really, I guess the only way you could put this is spill his bile all over the courtroom, and she allowed him to have that opportunity to do that?
She did. She gave him that time, and he talked, and this was a kind of like a pre-trial release hearing, because he said, I'm definitely going to retry these guys again. I'm not dropping the charges. They are coming back to court to face these charges, and she gave him that time, and they ended up letting them defendants go home. They both live in Idaho, and they both have jobs and families there, and I've talked to them a couple of times since, and have gotten really close to these guys, so I visit them in jail the last few months and helping fight their case the best I can and observe in court. I see them every day, and but they did get to go home, and they say they're going to be back in court. They're looking forward to it, even if it is injustice what's happening. They will be there to see this through the end.
Has anybody talked about the double and triple jeopardy aspects of this? Because this is obvious that if this were to go to the Supreme Court, let's just say that they got some kind of a guilty verdict, and someone had the intestinal fortitude to take this forward to, the circuit courts and then eventually the Supreme Court. I mean, this is so obvious that double and triple jeopardy. Has anybody mentioned any aspect of that at all in the courtroom?
They definitely have. Not in front of the jurors, but they have. There's been motions filed. There's been motions heard. And I know there has been motions filed again with the Ninth Circuit District Court. But the judge just keeps ruling that she's going to allow it. She has literally denied every single motion that the defense has ever had in the last 19 months, except for one. And that one motion was to let these guys go after they were found not guilty in this last trial. But other than that, we have never had a motion granted to us. Every motion has always been denied. So we have literally a 100% rate of every motion being denied, no matter what it is. And that's what we've had to deal with for the last 19 months.
Wow. All I can think of is the court hearings in Nazi Germany when the general officers and the general staff were found to be trying to assassinate Hitler, and the screaming and the ranting that the judges did against the defendants, and they had absolutely no rights in that hearing at all, in that courtroom. That sounds like the same kind of courtroom that we've got right here in the United States.
It definitely does, and this gets brought up over and over again. And for the corruption part, one of the defendants here in this case that got to speak to the judge, and the judge told him that he was the same monster that he was accusing the government of. And she's trying over all this whole case. That's what we keep saying, that she needs to be removed. How can she sit in the same case over and over again and sentence these guys? And every day she says you are guilty. She doesn't say you're innocent until proven guilty. She tells them they are guilty. She denies them being unshackled in court. They have to be shackled up like criminals or animals throughout their whole trial. They're not allowed to be unshackled during trial. They have been deemed terrorists, and that's the same thing that what happened in Nazi Germany. These Jews and other races, the Romanians and the blacks, were all considered terrorists against the government there, and they're doing the same thing in this country. And I wish more people could come and observe these court trials. I challenge people to come there and just sit there 1 day in court, 2 days, a week, whatever you can. Don't listen to what I'm saying on this. Come and listen to for yourselves what's happening there. I'll be there. If you show up, you come over and talk to me. I'll make sure you know your way around the courthouse. It's my second home right now. I've been there for almost a year just in Las Vegas alone, not counting the last 9-10 months in Portland I spent before that. And I challenge people and encourage them, come and sit in court. Watch what's going on. Listen for yourself. And I guarantee you what I'm saying doesn't even touch what's really happening in there. I can't even expound on the words of how corrupt these courts are.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I think that one of the things that we've got to be concerned about here is the amount of prison time that they're talking about for these various defendants. Would you kind of try, with these charges that they've got against these people, now understand, in Bunkerville, the Bundys, this was a case where Ammon Bundy was not going to pay the fees to the BLM, but he offered to pay it to the county and to the state. And they refused. They said they weren't in a position to take those fees, and so they didn't pay it. But the bottom line is those fees were how much? It was about $100,000, something like that, before fines and all the other garbage they threw on there. With that and the fact that all these people showed up from literally all over the West at Bunkerville to be there to help the Bundys. The bottom line on this, what kind of prison time are we talking about here?
Well, we're looking at 30 years minimum for just if Eric Parker gets charged with these additional charges that the jurors were hung on last time, not counting all the not guilties, he will spend over 30 years yet in prison. Cliven's looking at over 100 years. Ammon Bundy's looking at over 100 years. Ryan Bundy's over 100. Pete Santilli over 100 years. Pete Santilli never had a gun, never at the refuge. He never even slept at the refuge in Oregon. Pete Santilli did the same thing over there in Bunkerville, Nevada. He never stayed there. He had a hotel room in town, and he would just go out there during the day, during the protest time, and do his live streaming and YouTube videos and things like that, just reporting like a newscaster would, independent newscaster, so the world would know what's happening there. And Cliven never had a gun, but he's charged with multiple gun charges. These are they call them terrorism enhancement charges. So if a normal person would get 20 years, they enhance it 11 times the amount of time you would go to jail. And that's what they're giving all these guys. They're trying to give them this 11 points enhancement. Wow.
Well, people that don't understand what 9/11 was all about, and we've had Richard Gage on my program. We've had Eric Lawyer on the program. We've had people talking about what 9/11 really amounted to. And the bottom line, 9/11 was there so that they could get the Patriot Act through Congress, and they could literally strip our Constitution from the citizens of this country. And that's really what the Patriot Act was all about, and that's where you're talking about what the additional enhancements of these charges are. Now, think about this. A rancher and his two sons stand up against the federal government because they don't want to pay fees to the federal government, but they're willing to pay those same fees to the state because they say that the land shouldn't be held by the federal government. And then that same land, they turn around and the senator from Nevada, Harry Reid, has a deal worked out with his son and some Chinese company to put all these solar panels and stuff on this same land. And they talk about the tortoise as being so important and all this stuff, but everything they did was absolutely against the environmental aspects. I mean, the tortoises, they hung around because the cattle were there, and there was water there because they had all these tanks out there in the middle of the desert.
And so everything that they're doing is so totally the opposite of what we would expect from our own government.
Yeah, I've walked all over this whole ranch. I've been all over different parts of it, and the water lines out there, the federal government, the BLM, they had a court order to round up cows. That was it. Not to destroy water lines, not to destroy water tanks, but these water tanks that Clive and Bundy has put all over this ranch and these water lines, the BLM took a backhoe for 10 miles and dug up water lines, destroying it. They didn't just cut one hole every mile. They dug up 10 miles of water line. They busted holes in all these water tanks. The water tanks weren't just for the cows. They were for the wildlife out there and the deer and the other animals. But they destroyed the water for every living thing out there in the desert. And the BLM did not have permission to do that. There was no court order allowing them to do that. It was just to round up cows only. And I have seen those solar panels being built out there. And they're not worried about desert tourists there. They're putting in solar panels that are acres and acres big, 20,000 acres big or whatever. It's humongous. As far as the eye can see, it's nothing but a solar panel that I don't know how they get by with it. Instead of cows, now they got solar panels.
Well, one of the things that I noticed, too, when they were doing the roundup of the cattle, they killed a bunch of the Bundy's cattle. I know they killed at least a couple of their bulls, and then they tried to bury them and tried to get rid of the evidence. And how many of their cattle actually did they end up losing as a result of this?
Well, there was over 30 cows for sure that was killed. That was either shot, like the bulls were shot. There was a lot of heifers shot, but there's over 30 of them. And they dug mass graves out there, and they buried these cows in these mass graves, trying to cover this up, so no one would know it. They didn't get no permits and watch out for desert tourists when they was digging for these mass graves. They just took a backhoe and they just dug big old pits, pushed these dead cows in they killed, loading them up in dump trucks and hauled them to these mass graves and dumped all these cows in there and covered them up and tried to hide it. As soon as they left, Clive and his sons went out there and found these mass graves and dug them back up and took pictures. And so we have all that evidence that happened. But the BLM was trying to cover that. And over 30 cows, that's a lot of cows to a lot of ranchers.
Oh, yeah, that's, with the price of beef, well, it's not the same today as it was. But at the time that this whole thing came down, we were talking, a cow-calf pair, you were talking $3,000, $4,000. And so that's a lot of money when you're thinking in those terms. But just the fact that they did that tells me that, we've got a really corrupt system here. Now, you might find this hard to imagine, John, but I actually was on the Montana BLM RAC on the Resource Advisory Council. And I tried to bring some of these issues up. I tried to actually have Jennifer Fielder come to talk about the public lands issue in Montana and why they needed to hear both sides of the issue so that we could have a fair discussion. It was so loaded. This council was so loaded with environmental people. I mean, they literally just practically raked me over the coals for even suggesting such a thing. And it was really frustrating because it was so obvious that they didn't want to hear what the truth was. They just wanted to hear the side that they wanted to hear. And it's that way because they really, I was kind of an accident to get appointed to this BLM RAC. But obviously I doubt that I'll ever be on another one. But the thing is that the people that were on there, they try to stack it so that the environmental people and the Forest Service people, it's a lot of federal and a lot of state employees that get assigned to these RACs because they know that they will literally let them do whatever they want to do.
Well, I've met Jennifer Fielders a couple times, and I had a lot of high hopes for a long time there. I've had high hopes in even Ryan Zinke And a couple of weeks after Jeff Sessions come out in Las Vegas there, Jeff Sessions came out. He went out there towards the Bundy Ranch, and he actually spent a complete day out there. But he refused. He walked all over the Bundy Ranch, but he refused to meet with the Bundys, meet with any of their supporters, to talk to them about anything. And all he would talk about is what they're going to do with this BLM land and this monument and what all they're going to do out there. But it's been a big disappointment to me to see that some of these people that could do something to make a change, do something right, haven't done it at all.
What can we do as citizens in this country? What can we do to rally, I guess, the federal support from our elected officials and from our local officials? What can we do to rally the support that's necessary to get this before the president, to get this issue to a level where we can discuss whether or not these people, really, they not only should be pardoned, but they shouldn't have faced any of these charges even to begin with? And what can we do as citizens to help make that happen?
Well, I believe that as many letters that you can get out to your representatives in your state, and whether it's federal and state both, send letters to Congress, let them know what's going on, let them know that this kind of thing shouldn't be happening in this country, and make phone calls. They work for us, and they need to hear our voices. And if we're all quiet and only the opposite side's only the one making all the noise, we're never going to get nowhere. But these guys, these women that are in these elected offices need to hear from us, and they need to hear that what we want, what we're paying them to do. And that's one of the things we can do is let them know that our voices count too.
Well, John, I know one of the things that, of course, you and I have talked about this. I'm a presenter on the issue of UN Agenda 21 as obviously an opponent to UN Agenda 21. But people need to realize that this is directly connected with UN Agenda 21, because under UN Agenda 21 there will be no private property in the United States of America, and there will be no animal production that isn't under some kind of big corporate ownership. Small ranchers and farmers are going to be a thing of the past, and that's right in their own words, right in UN Agenda 21. So what we need to do is we need to start, too, electing people that have a reasonable understanding of what Agenda 21 is, and we're finally getting people to wake up to the reality that it does exist. Have you, in your travels throughout Nevada and throughout the West, I'm sure you run into a lot of people and talk about a lot of issues. Are more and more people starting to understand just exactly how closely this is tied to the so-called sustainable development under UN Agenda 21?
They definitely are. I'm running across people every day that are have been educating themselves, have been paying attention. People have been waking up. I see it all the time, and I see people that come to court one time, and then when they do, they're at awe, and they actually come back, and they're in a shock at what's happening in this country, because it's happened while we've been asleep. We just haven't realized it's been happening, and other things have been happening. They do it in the middle of the night when we're not aware of it. And so they've snuck these things in, and now people have found out, and they're upset. They don't like it either.
Well, I think hopefully we're going to have enough citizens in this country that are going to finally start to act and do something. And I have to say, the last 2 years, I've seen a big turnaround in this country. There are a lot of people that 5 years ago, you start talking about some of these issues, they looked at you like you had three eyeballs. But now they're starting to understand, and they see what's going on with groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter and all these different fringe groups that are controlling all the dialogue, and they're literally shutting down all of our traditional safeguards that were part of our constitutional guarantees in this country. And I think about this last weekend with the NFL and the fact that so many of the NFL players refused to stand up and salute the flag and or stand for the national anthem. Yeah, I'm sorry, I had a little mental lapse there. But anyway, this is something that people are starting to get sick of, and they're starting to react to it. And all I can say is that if there was ever a time in this country that we need people to really start to take hold of this stuff and do something, this is it, because we're running out of time in this country. And I know you felt this way for a long time. With these defendants in Nevada and what's going on there, what are their feelings and what are their attitudes about all this? And are they there for the fight, and are they going to stick with it?
They are for the fight, and I've been honored to be able to meet such good guys. Most defendants sitting in a jail, they all make a plea deal. Most of these guys have been offered plea deals. Every one of them, these guys have been denied it. Eric Parker could have made a plea deal. Scott Drexler, they've been through 2 trials already. They've refused plea deals, even if they could walk. Pete Santilli the other day was made a plea deal. If you accept conspiracy only, out of all of these numerous charges, you can walk. He said, no, we're not guilty. We're not going to accept a plea deal. I've seen this over and over again, and that intrigues me, because most defendants that go into get charged with something, they're ready to take a plea deal. What are you going to give me? Okay, I'll take 5 years over the 20 that I could get in court. These guys have reasons to hold their head high because they did nothing wrong. They did the right thing. They did not kill anybody. They did not threaten anybody. They went there for the right reasons, and that's why, to me, it's important to be there to support these guys and let them know that there are Americans out here that have their back, that are there to support them, and that's why we need as many people in those courtrooms as we can to keep these guys strong. Being in jail for 19 months, Ammon Bundy has probably spent almost a year of that in solitary confinement. Ryan Bundy has spent months and months in solitary confinement. I've never been to jail, but I can say that walking into those jails to visit them it's not a pleasant place. And for somebody who is supposed to be presumed innocent until they've been found guilty, these guys in these American jails have been treated like they're guilty already, and it's horrible. And most guys would just say, "Give me a plea deal. I'm ready to make the plea, and whatever, if I can get less than life, I'm happy." They've been denying these plea deals. They haven't been accepting them.
Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. And John, one of the things that we need to really do for these prisoners, for these defendants, is if there's anything that individuals can do to support them or to help them with this effort, I'd like for you to discuss that and let our listeners know what they can do, is if there's any kind of financial help or moral support or whatever, how our listeners can help.
Well, there's a couple of ways we can do it. I've got a Facebook page that I do live stream updates daily while I'm in court. So if you're not able to hear it on the news, you can definitely get on Facebook or YouTube, and you can just Google my name, John Lamb from Bozeman, Montana, and you can find my Facebook page. And I have multiple advertisements on there, just all about this court. It's all it's about. It just tells you every day the truth that's happening there, who you can support, each one of these families. I've got PayPal accounts for like Ammon Bundy, how to support his wife, why he's been incarcerated for 19 months, Cliven Bundy, Pete Santilli, Ryan Payne from Anaconda, Montana. And so I've got these PayPal accounts on there. I've even got my own PayPal, and money is always something I don't ever like to ask for myself, but if people want to help support while I'm on the road, it's appreciated. I have 11 kids on a farm over here, and I love my family, and I support them 100%, but I believe this is so important to be there that I've quit my work just to be able to do this, and so that's what I've been doing the last 19 months.
Yeah. Well, I know that, John, and I know that you're dedicated to this like very, very few people in this country. So, thank goodness we've still got you there. And we've got just a minute left before the end of the show, and I wanted to see if there's something that you want to kind of wrap up by making a statement about this whole trial process and let our listeners know exactly how you feel about this whole thing.
Well, I feel that an injustice to anyone, it doesn't matter, my neighbor or anyone, it's an injustice to me, because if anybody is overrun, if I watch them be run over, it's going to happen to me next. And I know I'm not saying it in the proper words, like there's this old saying that says that, but we need to stand up even for our neighbor, because it's going to happen to us next.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. In fact, we're seeing that in our country right now. I don't want to see America spelled with a K. But we're close, and way too close, because I think we've lost an awful lot of the real values that this country was founded on. And it's time for the citizens to understand we're here, the government is here to serve us, not the other way around. But the way the system is right now, the citizens are here to serve the government, and now the government's trying to turn the federal government over to the United Nations to a global government. And the reality is the further we get away from the individual and individual rights in this country, the closer we are to tyranny. So, John, I want to thank you for being our guest, and I hope that we can bring you on again for another program and connecting the dots maybe later in the year, and we'll kind of I'll keep in contact with you to find out how the trials are proceeding and get some updates from you. And again, I want to thank you for being our guest. And with that, I'll ask our listeners to please come back next week and listen to Connecting the Dots. We will help to connect a few more dots. This is what we're doing. And with that, Kelby, I'll turn the program back over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this week's show with Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. God bless. Good night. We'll see you next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific.